Between January 2019 and March 2022, someone was slowly draining the retirement savings, medical funds, and emergency money of over 1,400 working Americans.
Kayla, we've been looking at the books. Can you walk us through these withdrawals? You really don't expect me to start taking through all that?
Janitors, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, people who gave a piece of every paycheck to their union because they believed someone up top was looking out for them. The account they trusted held $680,000 of their money, and the woman who held the key to that account?
Who, Kayla? You were the only signatory.
I need to call my attorney. I've served this union with my utmost integrity.
She was at the podium every single month, shaking hands, giving speeches about dignity and fighting for the little guy, all while moving their money piece by piece into a private account that only she could touch. Her name is Kayla Arant. She was the elected president of Local 318 of the Service Employees Union in Decatur, Georgia. And what she pulled off over those 38 months was not a rushed, panicked grab. It was slow. It was careful. It was planned. She used her own members' trust like a blank check. And she kept signing it, month after month, until a paper trail she never thought anyone would find finally caught up with her. This story is fully documented, surveilled, court-proven. And by the end of this video, you are going to be floored by how long it went on, and how close it came to never being caught at all. How long do you think someone can steal from the very people who voted them into power before anybody looks up? Drop your number in the comments right now, because the real answer in this case is going to hit different than you expect. If you are new here, this channel covers real body cam footage, white-collar crime, and the investigations that bring people like Kayla Arant to the ground. Hit subscribe and tap the bell before we go any further, because we put out cases like this every single week. And if you are not subscribed, there is a very good chance you will never see them. Now let's get into it. Kayla Arant was born in 1979 in Gadsden, Alabama. If you have never been to Gadsden, picture this: a small river town that used to run on steel and sweat. By the time Kayla came into the world, most of those steel mills were already shutting down. The jobs were leaving. The money was leaving. But the union halls, those were still standing, still packed, still the most important buildings in town for working families who had nothing else to fall back on. Her father, Delvon Arant, gave 31 years of his life to a pipe-fitting plant as a maintenance technician. Her mother, Suwana Arant, cleaned offices at a hospital downtown before and after most people were even awake. Both of them were union members, not in a casual, card-carrying kind of way, in the real way. Dues paid on time, meetings attended, shop steward respected. They believed in the system because the system had protected them. And Kayla grew up inside all of that. She heard grievance filings talked about at the dinner table the way other kids heard about football scores. She knew what a collective bargaining agreement was before she ever sat behind a steering wheel. Words like solidarity, arbitration, dues structure, and executive board were not fancy terms to her. They were just how her family talked about work and survival. By the time she walked across the stage at Gadsden City High, she already understood how unions were supposed to function from the ground up. She got a partial scholarship to Jacksonville State University and studied public administration. She was smart enough to be there. But after 2 years, the money ran out and she had to make a choice. She left school and took a job as a cafeteria supervisor for a school district in DeKalb County, Georgia. It was not glamorous work, but it was steady, and more importantly, it put her directly in the path of SEIU Local 318, a mid-sized union chapter covering service workers across 4 Georgia counties. That was the door, and Kayla Arant walked straight through it. She became a shop steward in 2007. She showed up. She filed paperwork correctly. She fought for members when their supervisors pushed them around. People noticed. By 2013, she had moved up to secretary-treasurer, the person responsible for handling the local's money. By 2016, she ran for chapter president, and nobody even ran against her. Think about that for a second. Nobody ran against her, because nobody had a single reason not to trust her. She had grown up union. She had worked the same kinds of jobs as the people she represented. She talked the talk because she had been raised inside it. And that is exactly what made what came next so devastating. The people in that union hall were not naive. They were not careless. They trusted Kayla Arant because everything about her background said she was one of them. She had earned that trust slowly, over years, the right way. She just had very different plans for what to do with it. You need to understand how Local 3118 actually worked, because this was not a broken system. It was not a sloppy operation run by people who did not care. It was a perfectly normal, mid-sized union chapter doing what thousands of chapters just like it do every single day across the American South. Running lean, operating on trust, and keeping the lights on for working people who needed representation. Every member paid monthly dues. Depending on their job classification, that was somewhere between $38 and $44 a month. Multiply that across 1,400 plus members, and you are looking at between $53,000 and $62,000 coming in every single month. That money flowed into two operating accounts held at a small regional credit union in Decatur called Peachtree Community Federal. It paid for legal representation, grievance filings, office costs, staff, everything a functioning local needs to survive. And there were safeguards, real ones, on paper. There was a treasurer, a woman named Ozette Brambley, a food service worker who had been handling the role part-time for 11 years. She was not an accountant, but she was careful, and she knew the routine payments inside and out. There was also a 9-member executive board that was supposed to sit down every quarter and review how money was being spent. And on top of that, SEIU's national headquarters ran a full audit of every local chapter once every 3 years. That sounds like a solid system, and in most ways it was. But here is the problem. Every single one of those safeguards was pointed in the same direction, outward. The national audit was designed to catch outside threats, vendors overcharging the union, employers committing fraud against members, someone from the outside trying to steal. The board reviewed expense reports to make sure the local was not overspending on operations. Ozette Brambley signed off on the regular, predictable payments that came through every month like clockwork. Nobody was pointed inward. Nobody was watching the person at the top. And that is where it gets dangerous. Kayla Arant, as chapter president, had sole signatory authority over a third account that most people in that building had barely thought about in years. It was called the Executive Discretionary Fund. It had been set up back in 2011 to cover emergency operational expenses, a busted pipe, a last-minute legal filing, something that could not wait for a board vote. It was a legacy account. Before Kayla's presidency, it had barely been touched. The credit union only required one signature to move money out of it. Just one. And that signature belonged to whoever was sitting in the president's chair. Nobody had ever gone back and added a second signatory requirement. Nobody had flagged it as a risk. Why would they? The account had sat quiet for years. And besides, the president was supposed to be the most trusted person in the room. The last line of integrity, not the first line of threat. That single assumption that the person at the top could simply be trusted was the only wall standing between $680,000 and Kayla Arant. It was not enough. Here is the part that will really get under your skin. Kayla Arant did not panic. She did not rush. She did not grab what she could and run. She was slow, deliberate, and incredibly patient. And that patience is exactly what made her so hard to catch. The first unusual withdrawal from the Executive Discretionary Fund was logged in January 2019, $1,200. The paperwork described it as an emergency facility repair, a broken HVAC unit at the Decatur office. Completely believable. The kind of thing that happens in any office building. The receipt looked legitimate. The vendor name checked out at first glance. It was only years later, when federal investigators dug into it, that they confirmed the vendor listed on that receipt had not been in operation since 2017. But nobody checked in 2019. Why would they? It was $1,200. The president had signed off. Move on. Over the next 6 months, the withdrawals kept coming, averaging around $2,800 a month. More repairs, equipment purchases, one-time consulting fees. Every single one of them came with supporting paperwork that looked exactly right, because Kayla had spent 2 decades working in administration and she knew precisely what real documentation was supposed to look like. The fonts, the formatting, the language, she did not guess. She knew. Then, by mid-2020, she leveled up. She opened a sole proprietorship in her sister-in-law's county and registered it under the name Arrant Solutions LLC. On paper, it was a labor consulting firm offering strategic planning services. In reality, it was an empty shell, a business name with no employees, no office, and no actual work being done. She then began cutting checks directly from the union's account to Arrant Solutions. $7,500 in August 2020, $9,200 in October, $14,000 by February 2021. And when those payments showed up in the quarterly board expense reports, they were not easy to spot. Because Kayla had quietly renamed the budget category that covered them. It used to be called Professional Services, a label that might invite someone to ask which professional and for what. She changed it to Organizational Development Contracts. Broader, vaguer, the kind of label that makes people nod and move to the next line. Nobody asked questions. The money that left those accounts built her a completely different life. She put $241,000 into renovating her home in Lithonia, Georgia, paid out in careful installments to contractors so no single payment looked too large. She walked into a Gwinnett County dealership and paid $74,800 cash for a 2021 Escalade ESV. She took trips to Cancun and Montego Bay and filed them as leadership conference travel. She wiped out more than $90,000 in personal credit card debt across 3 separate accounts. And every single month, $3,500 quietly moved into a private savings account she had opened under a slightly altered version of her name, Kayla Arant, as if the extra distance from her full legal name would make it harder to trace. Over 38 months, $680,000 walked out of an account that belonged to janitors, bus drivers, and cafeteria workers, and every single one of them still showed up to pay their dues. Here's what I want you to think about before we get into the investigation. This wasn't a smash and grab. This was a slow, patient, methodical dismantling, committed by someone who understood the system from the inside, knew where the cameras weren't pointed, and used her members' trust as a blank check. How many institutions in your life operate on that same assumption that the person at the top is simply honest? Subscribe and hit the bell if you're not already. We expose exactly this kind of case every single week. After 38 months, $680,000 gone, and not a single alarm raised inside Local 318. The thing that finally brought Kayla Arant down was not a sophisticated federal sweep. It was not a whistleblower with inside knowledge. It was not even a routine audit catching something suspicious. It was one man who refused to take no for an answer. His name was Cheriston Mabry. He had been a school custodian for 18 years and a dues-paying member of Local 318 for every single one of them. In the summer of 2020, he got hurt on the job and filed a workman's compensation dispute, exactly the kind of situation the union's legal defense fund existed to cover. But when Cheriston came looking for help, he was told the fund was temporarily undercapitalized. They could not assist him right now. Be patient. He waited. He came back. He was told the same thing again. Then a third time. 14 months passed. 3 times he was turned away with the same vague explanation and no real answers. Most people would have eventually walked away frustrated and accepted it. Cheriston Mabry did not walk away. In October 2021, he went over the local's head entirely and contacted SEIU's national office in Washington, D.C. directly. He filed his complaint and laid out exactly what had happened. The National Compliance Division took his inquiry, cross-referenced it with Local 318's most recent financial disclosure filing, and stopped cold. The Executive Discretionary Fund was not in the report, not listed as empty, not marked as closed or merged with another account. It was simply not there. An account that had been receiving and sending tens of thousands of dollars had vanished from the paperwork entirely. The national office did not call Kayla. They did not send a letter to the local. They quietly contacted the Department of Labor's Office of Labor Management Standards, the federal agency responsible for making sure union finances are handled legally. The OLMS opened a covert review in November 2021 and said nothing to anyone inside Local 318. For 4 months, 2 OLMS investigators worked alongside a forensic accountant brought in from Atlanta. They did not step foot inside the union office. They did not interview a single member. Instead, they went straight to Peachtree Community Federal with federal subpoenas and pulled every transaction record tied to the Executive Discretionary Fund going back years. They traced every check written to Arrant Solutions LLC. They pulled the business registration and found the sister-in-law's name on it. They found the private savings account opened under Kayla Arant and flagged the name discrepancy immediately. By February 2022, they had the full picture, but they wanted one more thing: proof she was still actively stealing. So they set a trap. They arranged for a fabricated SEIU national reimbursement, $18,500 deposited directly into the Executive Discretionary Fund, marked internally with a serialized tracking code that investigators could follow in real time. 11 days later, Kayla moved $15,000 of it straight into the Arrant Solutions account. Every movement was logged, time-stamped, documented. She had just handed them everything they needed. The arrest was scheduled for a Thursday morning, March 10th, 2022. 8:47 in the morning. Kayla Arant had stopped at a Dunkin' 2 blocks from the office. She had picked up a full tray of coffees for the executive board meeting she was hosting in 20 minutes. It was a normal Tuesday morning routine for a union president heading into a routine meeting. She pulled into the parking lot of the Local 318 office on Commerce Drive in Decatur, coffees in hand, and stepped out of her car. That was as far as the normal morning got. 3 figures crossed the parking lot toward her with purpose. Special Agent Truvello Conquo of the FBI's Atlanta Financial Crimes Unit was leading the approach. Beside him, 2 other law enforcement officers, a federal agent and a DeKalb County detective. All 3 moving with the kind of calm, steady energy that does not leave room for confusion about what is happening. Agent Okonkwo's Bodycam was already rolling. He stopped a few feet in front of her. "Kayla Arant?" "Yes." "Federal agents. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement of union funds, and money laundering. Can you set those coffees down for me?" She did not move, not for 4 full seconds. The coffee tray tilted slightly in her hands. One cup shifted toward the edge. Her eyes moved across the 3 faces in front of her and then back to Agent Okonkwo. Whatever was happening inside her head in that moment, her body had not decided what to do with it yet. Then she spoke. I'm sorry, what? There has to be a mistake. I'm the president of this local. I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Agent Okonkwo did not blink. "Ma'am, there's no mistake. I need you to set the tray down and place your hands behind your back." She set the coffees down on the hood of the nearest car. Her hands were visibly shaking as she did it. Before the handcuffs were even fully on, she had already asked 3 times if she could make a phone call. She did not ask for a family member. She did not ask for a friend. She named her attorney specifically, which told investigators everything they needed to know about how prepared some part of her had been for a moment like this one. After that, Kayla Arant said nothing, not one word without counsel present. There was one witness to the whole thing. Ozette Brambley, the chapter treasurer who had spent 11 years signing off on routine payments, who had sat across from Kayla in board meetings dozens of times, had pulled into that same parking lot about 30 seconds before the agents made their approach. She did not get out of her car. She sat behind her windshield and watched the entire arrest happen without moving a muscle. She told investigators later, "I thought she was just being stopped for something minor. Then I saw the handcuffs and I couldn't move." The coffees sat on the hood of that car for a long time after. The board meeting never happened. The federal indictment came down in April 2022, 11 counts, wire fraud, embezzlement from an employee benefit plan, money laundering. The kind of charge sheet that, when you read it line by line, tells the full story of just how deliberate and calculated the whole operation had been. Kayla's defense team came out swinging. They filed 2 separate motions to throw out the bank subpoenas, arguing the records had been obtained improperly. Both were denied. They then spent 6 weeks fighting to have the bait transaction removed from evidence entirely, arguing that the OLMS sting operation had crossed a legal line. U.S. District Judge Meredith Callaway Fitch reviewed the arguments carefully and rejected that motion too, ruling that everything the federal investigators had done fell squarely within lawful investigative boundaries. The walls were closing in from every direction. Facing a potential 47 years in federal prison if convicted on all 11 counts, Kayla Arant made the only calculation left available to her. In September 2022, she entered a guilty plea, 1 count of wire fraud, 1 count of embezzlement. The deal was done. At sentencing, Judge Callaway Fitch looked across the courtroom and said what a lot of people in that building were already thinking. You did not steal from a corporation. You stole from people who trusted you specifically because they had no one else to trust. Kayla Arant was sentenced to 9 years and 4 months in federal prison. She was ordered to pay back the full $680,000 in restitution, and she was permanently banned from ever holding any kind of financial or leadership role inside a labor organization again. Arrant Solutions LLC was formally dissolved. Her sister-in-law, Pembroke Arant, whose name had been used to register the shell company, cooperated fully with investigators from the very beginning and was not charged with any crime. The 2021 Escalade ESV was seized by federal authorities and auctioned off, with every dollar from the sale applied directly toward the restitution amount. And Sheriston Mabry, the school custodian who had been turned away 3 times, who had refused to simply accept a vague excuse and walk away, whose single decision to pick up the phone and call Washington had started the entire chain of events, received a formal letter of acknowledgement from SEIU's national office. His workman's compensation dispute was retroactively funded in full. A local reporter caught up with him after the sentencing, asked him how it felt to be the person who brought it all down. He said he did not feel like a hero. He said he just wanted his money. Local 318 overhauled its entire financial structure. Every account now requires 2 signatures for any withdrawal. The Executive Discretionary Fund was capped at $5,000. Annual forensic audits by an independent third party are now mandatory, not once every 3 years, but every single year. And Ozette Brambley still drives down Commerce Drive every morning on her way to work. She still passes that parking lot. And she told investigators she still thinks about those coffees sitting on the hood of that car, going cold, for a board meeting that never happened. If this case made you look differently at the people and institutions you trust with your money, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe for new cases every single week. Every view helps this channel keep telling stories that matter. I'll see you in the next one.